The phone vibrates against the wooden table, its screen lighting up the dim room. I hesitate before sliding my finger across the glass. Mom. Laura's voice is clipped, impatient. Don't interfere anymore. We'll handle it. You're irrelevant. The line cracks, the static buzzing in my ear like a swarm of angry bees. Then silence. The call ends before I can breathe out a word. I freeze. The phone feels heavier than stone in my palm, pressing down, pulling me into the floor. My chest contracts. My ears ring. Somewhere in the house, the clock ticks, cruelly steady, as if mocking the way my own pulse has lost its rhythm. Irrelevant. The word slices deeper than any insult I've ever known. It isn't shouted. It isn't angry. It is casual, dismissive, like brushing lint off a sleeve. I press the phone to my chest, as though holding it close might rewind her voice, change the sentence. But the echo lingers, bouncing against the walls, the furniture, the hollow air. I whisper to myself, irrelevant? After everything I gave them? The lamp in the corner flickers once, casting a thin yellow light across the living room. Dust floats like tiny ghosts in the beam. My hand trembles as I set the phone down. It slips, clattering against the hardwood. The sound startles me, loud in the emptiness, and I clutch my lap as if to steady my entire body. I want to scream, to call her back, to demand an explanation. But my throat seals shut. Only my breathing fills the room, shallow and ragged, as though someone else is gasping through me. I look around. The family photos line the mantelpiece. Laura at her college graduation, smiling wide under her cap. Mark as a boy, holding up a paper castle he'd glued together with my help. My face, always at the edge of the frame, smiling, blurred, as if I was never the focus. Now my own daughter has spoken the truth they all believed. I was never central. I was decoration, background. The longer I sit there, the heavier the silence grows. My stomach knots until I fold over, pressing my forehead to my knees. Irrelevant. It plays on loop, sharper each time, until I feel stripped bare, erased. Finally, I force myself upright. The clock reads 9007 p.m. I reach for the curtains and pull them shut, hiding the night sky, hiding from the world outside. The fabric smells faintly of dust and lavender detergent. I grip it hard, the texture scratching my skin, grounding me just enough not to collapse. Somewhere deep inside, an ember stirs. A protest, small but insistent. Yet tonight, it cannot catch fire. Tonight, all I can do is sink into the worn armchair and let the shadows close around me. I stare at my hands. The veins stand out like blue rivers. My fingers curl into fists, then loosen, weak. This body carried them, worked for them, built the foundation of their lives, and now discarded. That night, I murmur into the stillness, my voice breaking in half. Their words carved me out of my own family picture. The word irrelevant followed me to bed that night, but sleep would not come. My body tossed against the sheets, my mind pulling me backward through decades, unspooling the thread of how I arrived at this exile. I was 28 when I first stepped into a classroom as a teacher. Chalk dust clung to my fingers, and the eyes of 30 restless children bore down on me. It was never glamorous work, but it was steady, noble, and honest. For 30 years, I carried home stacks of essays in worn tote bags, grading them late into the night while my children slept down the hall. My salary was modest, but I stretched every paycheck until it sang with purpose. Each month, I carved out a small envelope of savings. It was never much, $50 here, $100 there, but over time, the envelopes fattened. When I finally moved everything into a savings account, the numbers looked almost foreign, as if they couldn't possibly belong to me. Those savings were never meant for vacations or luxuries. They were earmarked, silently, for Laura and Mark, for their futures. Laura had always been the dreamer. From the time she was 12, She would sketch houses in the margins of her notebooks, spiraling staircases, pointed roofs, elaborate courtyards. At 16, she declared she wanted to become an architect. I told her I would help however I could, though I had no idea what that promise would ultimately cost. By the time college acceptances arrived, tuition had ballooned far beyond what I earned in a year. I took out $85,000 from the account I had nurtured like a fragile plant. I wired it directly to her school. "Mom," Laura said, teary-eyed on the night we unpacked her dorm room, "I promise one day I'll build you a house as beautiful as Edo Castle." I laughed, smoothing the sheets on her narrow bed. "I'll just settle for your honesty." Her smile flickered, quick and radiant. At the time, I believed it. Mark was different. Practical, restless, impatient. College never interested him, but when he turned 25, he came to me with a business plan scribbled on the back of an envelope. "A repair shop," he said. "Motorcycles, small engines." His eyes glowed with the kind of conviction that makes you forget the risks. He needed $42,000 to start. It was nearly everything I had left after Laura's tuition, but I gave it to him anyway. "It's an investment," I told myself. "He'll pay me back. Or at least, he'll stand on his own." For years, my life was measured in sacrifices like these. I drove the same car until its paint peeled and its muffler roared. I patched my shoes instead of buying new ones. The other teachers at school teased me gently for bringing the same canvas bag to work for a decade. But that bag was still sturdy, and I preferred to see the numbers grow in my children's accounts rather than in my closet. There was one indulgence I allowed myself. During a faculty exchange trip to Japan in my 40s, I bought a small Edo period wooden box from a street vendor in Asakusa. It was carved with delicate patterns of cranes and pine trees, the wood polished smooth by age and touch. It cost me $50, an amount that once would have fed us for a week, but I couldn't resist. When the vendor handed it to me, he said in halting English, "Good luck, family treasure." I held on to that phrase. At home, I placed the box on my dresser. I told myself it was a bua mei mun nen, a lucky charm, and that as long as I kept it, my sacrifices would multiply into blessings for Laura and Mark. Every time I withdrew from my savings to fund their next step, I touched the box first, whispering, "Make this worth it." And, for a long time, I thought it was. Laura graduated with honors, standing tall in her cap and gown while I clapped until my hands stung. Mark opened his shop, and for a brief season, he sent me photos of grinning customers beside their repaired bikes. I believed their promises, that one day, the fruits of my labor would circle back. But slowly, almost invisibly, their dreams detached from me. Laura's calls grew infrequent. When we did talk, she was too busy, too many clients, too many projects. Mark's texts shifted from cheerful updates to urgent requests. Rent was due, a supplier had overcharged, could I wire a little more just this once? Each time, I touched the Edo box, hoping it still held power. Each time, I sent the money anyway. Now, in the shadow of Laura's words, irrelevant. I see the truth of that wooden box. It was never magic. It was a mirror, a silent witness to the way I gave and gave and gave, until my own reflection blurred. I returned to the mantelpiece where the family photos stand. My eyes linger on one. Laura at 20, standing before a cardboard model of a castle she'd built for a class. Her hand rests lightly on the turret, her smile beaming with certainty. "I'll build you a house as beautiful as Edo Castle." How young her voice had sounded that night. How earnestly I believed her. But the house never came. The honesty never came. Only silence, distance, and now erasure. I close my eyes and breathe, feeling the years settle on my shoulders like bricks. And in that suffocating quiet, one thought crystallizes with the sharpness of glass. I realized I had been financing dreams that never included me. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop glowing faintly in the half-light. The screen displayed what it always did on the first Monday of the month: a scheduled transfer to Mark's account. Automatic. Efficient. Unquestioned. My hand hovered over the trackpad. My index finger trembled. It was absurd how such a small movement could feel heavier than carrying both children through feverish nights, or dragging grocery bags up the steps after 12-hour workdays. I stared at the numbers. 1,200. The same amount I had sent, month after month, year after year. My breath snagged in my throat. Inside my chest, two voices clashed. If I keep paying, I'll vanish. If I stop, I might finally exist. The thought landed like thunder. I moved the cursor to the cancel transfer button. My fingers shook so violently, I had to use my other hand to steady it. A single click, and the screen refreshed. The scheduled payment was gone. The silence afterward was deafening. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to falter, holding its breath with me. My body stiffened, waiting for some lightning bolt of guilt or regret to strike. None came. Only stillness. I sat motionless, staring at the word. Cancelled. Something inside me shifted. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. My gaze fell on the old Edo box resting on the shelf. For decades, it had been my charm, my silent witness. I stood, lifted it carefully, and pressed it against my chest. The wood felt cool, steady. On a slip of paper torn from my notebook, I scrawled one word: mine. I taped it to the lid. My handwriting looked shaky, but the meaning was solid. It was no longer a talisman for them. It was a promise to myself. That afternoon, I walked to the locksmith at the corner. The air outside was sharp with the bite of early spring, the wind tugging at my coat. I placed my house key on the counter and said, "Change it." The locksmith looked at me curiously, but didn't ask questions. I watched as he shaved metal, sparks flying, each strike of the machine echoing like a drumbeat in my bones. When he slid the new key across to me, my palm closed around it with a grip stronger than I expected. At home, I locked the door. The sound of the bolt sliding shut was louder than any apology I had ever whispered, louder than every "just this once" I had told myself before transferring money. It was final. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back at me, gray hair escaping from its bun, fine lines cutting across my cheeks, tired eyes ringed in shadow. I had spent years avoiding this gaze, ashamed of the woman who gave everything away. But now, I leaned closer. "You're not irrelevant," I whispered, my voice cracking at first, then steadying. "You're unfinished." The woman in the glass blinked. For the first time in years, she didn't look small. I turned off the bathroom light and walked back into the dim hallway. My bare feet patted softly against the wooden floor. The house was quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. It pulsed with a new kind of stillness, one I could almost mistake for strength. As I crawled into bed, I felt no need to clutch the phone or rehearse excuses for my children. My chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm, my breath no longer caught in their nets. For the first time, my silence was not surrender, but resistance. The news point of the sevulators after I canceled the transfer, the knock came. Heavy, deliberate, echoing through the hallway like a gavel. I froze in the kitchen, hands still damp from rinsing dishes. My heart skittered. Only one kind of knock carried that weight: family with demands. When I opened the door, Mark stood on the porch. His shoulders were hunched, his jaw set in that familiar scowl he wore as a boy when told no. Beside him was a man in a wrinkled suit, clutching a leather briefcase. And behind them, arms folded across her chest, stood Laura. My throat tightened. "What's this?" Mark brushed past me without waiting. "It's routine, Mom." I stepped aside, unwillingly letting them enter. The living room shrank under their presence. The lawyer dropped into my armchair without asking, snapping open his briefcase. Papers rustled. Laura leaned against the mantel, gaze sharp, lips pressed into a thin line. Mark planted himself across from me, his voice flat. "Mom, just sign the proxy. It's nothing complicated. We'll manage things for you. Easier for everyone." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. The old wood dug into my palms, grounding me. "Routine is when you pay bills," I said evenly. "Stealing is when you erase me." The room stilled. Only the lawyer's pen clicked in his fingers, a soft metallic snap that scraped my nerves raw. Laura rolled her eyes. "Mom, don't dramatize. You're making this harder than it has to be. We're just trying to help." I laughed bitterly, a sound that surprised even me. "Help? You called me irrelevant. And now you want my signature?" Her arms tightened, chin jutting higher. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I snapped. My voice sliced the air, sharper than I'd intended. "You meant exactly that." The lawyer cleared his throat, trying to take control. "Mrs. Parker, this is a standard authorization. It allows your children to manage your financial affairs more efficiently. Nothing unusual." His words slithered through the room, slick and practiced. He tapped the papers with his pen, the sound rhythmic, insistent. Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "Just sign, Mom. Don't make this ugly." Ugly. As if the ugliness wasn't already etched into every line of their faces. I straightened my back, meeting his eyes. "I built you. I carried you, clothed you, paid for everything you ever dreamed. And now you think you can take what's left?" Mark's jaw clenched. "We're your family." "Family doesn't bring a lawyer to their mother's house," I fired back. The lawyer slid the proxy form across the table. The paper hissed against the wood. "It really is in your best interest, Mrs. Wizes. Parker. At your age, these arrangements are common." "My age." Another blade. I stared at the paper. Blank spaces waited for my name, my ink, the surrender of my control. My hand hovered, not from temptation, but from fury at how easily they assumed I would comply. Laura's voice softened, sugar laced with venom. "Mom, please. Don't make us go further. Just sign." I pushed the paper back with a steady hand. "No." Mark slammed his palm onto the table, rattling the lamp. "Damn it, Mom." I flinched but didn't retreat. "Don't raise your voice in my house." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't stop Mark. Laura stepped closer, her heels clicking on the floorboards. "If you don't sign, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. Do you want it to come to that?" Her threat floated heavy in the air, a storm cloud thickening. I rose slowly from my chair. My legs wobbled, but my voice was firm. "Do what you want. But understand this. I built you, but I won't sign away myself." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Mark's face flushed red. Laura's lips parted, then sealed shut. The lawyer looked down at his briefcase, suddenly fascinated with the clasp. I held their gaze, one by one, until they faltered, until the weight shifted back to me. The silence stretched, thick and electric. My chest heaved, but not with fear, with something stronger. I reached for the Edo box on the shelf. My fingers traced its carved cranes, the paper slip taped to its lid. Mine. I held it close, not for luck this time, but for proof. "This," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "is what's left of me. And you can't touch it." Mark cursed under his breath, snatching the papers from the table. Laura shot me a look, half fury, half disbelief. Without another word, they turned for the door. The lawyer stumbled after them, his briefcase clapping shut. The door slammed. The echo lingered, rattling through the bones of the house, through the cage I had lived in for too long. My knees nearly buckled. I sank back into the chair, my breath shaking loose, tears blurring my vision. But beneath the tears, something fierce burned steady. I was not their obedient ink anymore. I was my own signature. For a few quiet days, I let myself believe the storm had passed. The canceled transfer sat in the air like a secret flame, small but steady. I held on to the sound of the door slamming, the image of Mark's red face, Laura's narrowed eyes. Maybe, I thought, they had finally understood that my boundaries were real. But peace never lasts long in a house where betrayal lingers. It began with an envelope slipped through my mail slot. No stamp, no return address. I bent to pick it up, and my knees nearly gave way when I opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a transfer of ownership form. My name appeared at the bottom, my signature perfectly etched, every curve of the letters identical to my handwriting. Only, I had never signed it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My own name stared back at me, stolen, twisted. I whispered into the empty room, "How dare you?" The edges of the paper curled in my grip as sweat gathered in my palms. My stomach heaved. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a clerical error. But deep down, I knew. This was not routine. This was war. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the roofs of the neighborhood, I confided in Mrs. This Day, Tanaka, my widowed neighbor who often brought me bowls of miso soup. She listened without interruption, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. When I finished, she nodded once, her face calm, eyes sharp. "In Edo times," she said softly, her accent wrapping around each syllable, "honor was guarded with a sword. Now, your sword is truth." Her words settled deep inside me, heavier than steel. I tightened my grip on the forged document. Then I need to sharpen mine. The next morning, I began my hunt for proof. I dragged out shoeboxes of receipts, binders of old bank statements. My dining table disappeared under stacks of paper, my laptop screen filled with transaction histories. I printed every email I had ever received from Mark and Laura about money. I highlighted dates, circled phrases like, "just until next month," and "we'll pay you back soon." 2. My highlighter bled neon yellow across their broken promises. I called my bank, demanding full copies of all transfers for the past 5 years. The clerk's polite voice faltered when I explained why. "We'll expedite the request, Mrs. Parker," he said, and I caught the edge of pity in his tone. At night, exhaustion crushed me. My eyes blurred from hours of scanning statements, but each time I thought of giving up, the forged signature blazed in my mind. My own name, stolen. My own identity, weaponized against me. I whispered to myself as I stapled papers together, "This is my sword." One afternoon, while sorting through a pile of Mark's forgotten folders he'd left behind during his last visit, my hand brushed something unusual. A thick envelope tucked between utility bills. My breath hitched. I pulled it free. The flap was half sealed. Inside, I found drafts, several copies of the same transfer of ownership form. Some with smudged ink, some with half-finished signatures, like failed rehearsals. The room tilted. My legs wobbled. I dropped into the chair, the envelope spilling across the floor. My hand reached for the top page, and as my fingers closed around it, they shook uncontrollably. The paper trembled in my grasp, my sweat staining its edge. It was undeniable. They had been practicing my name over and over until the forgery looked flawless. A sob rose in my throat, but no tears came. Only fury, hot and searing. I pressed the document flat on the table, leaning over it, my breath fogging the surface. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Not even my name is safe from you." But beneath the heartbreak, another sensation pulsed, steady, relentless, resolve. I began photographing everything. The forged pages, the drafts, the envelope with Mark's handwriting on the corner. I lined them up like evidence on a crime board, snapping pictures with the steadiness of a detective. When I finished, I stacked the papers neatly, slipped them into a new binder, and wrote on the cover in bold letters, Inshin. Natter. 6 estimated tutti. That night, I sat across from Mrs. the Blowing, Tanaka at her kitchen table, the scent of simmering miso filling the air. I laid the binder before her. Her eyes flicked over the pages, her mouth tightening, her brow furrowing deeper with each turn. When she closed it, she looked straight at me. They underestimated you, she said. Good. Her calmness wrapped around me like armor. I nodded, my jaw set. They wanted to erase me with ink. They forgot. I know how to write my own story. The following days, I fortified my defenses. I installed a small camera above my front door, another in the living room. I updated my locks again. Each click of metal into place sounded like a drumbeat of resistance. I began journaling every phone call, every interaction, dates, times, words. If they wanted a battle, I would be ready. And still, each night, when I lay down, the forged signature haunted me. I saw it scrawled across the dark inside my eyelids, daring me to surrender. My hand would curl into a fist against the sheets until sleep finally pulled me under. But with every dawn, I rose sharper, stronger. One evening, as I sat at my cluttered dining table, the forged page spread before me. I ran my fingertips slowly along the line of my stolen name. My hand trembled, sweat beading at my temples. The wood of the Edo box pressed against my thigh where I had placed it for courage. I whispered, each word slow and deliberate. You forged me. You tried to make me disappear. But you gave me proof. I set the paper down, pressed my palms firmly to its surface, and drew in a long breath. The air was thick, heavy, but it no longer smothered me. Their forgery became my fuel. When I finally carried the binder labeled Chew, Chew into a lawyer's office, I felt as though I was carrying my entire body on those pages. My hands shook as I placed it on the desk. The man across from me was younger than I expected, Daniel Brooks. Late 30s perhaps, with dark hair falling untidily over his forehead. His suit was not expensive, but his eyes, sharp, restless, alive, met mine with a steadiness that made my chest loosen just slightly. He flipped through the binder, page after page of bank records, drafts of forged signatures, photographs I had taken. His lips pressed into a line. When he closed it, he asked simply, "Do you want justice or just peace?" The question struck like lightning. My fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. My voice came low, steady. Peace without justice is just exile. I want both. For the first time in weeks, I saw approval in someone's eyes. The days that followed blurred into preparation. Daniel called me often, his voice brisk but patient. "We'll need originals, not just copies. We'll need testimony from your bank. And you'll have to be ready to speak, Mrs. Parker. They'll try to rattle you. Speak." The very thought made my throat constrict. For decades I had spoken softly, smoothing conflicts, erasing my own edges for the sake of others. Now my words would have to stand like pillars under oath. So I practiced. In the bathroom mirror, I rehearsed the story of my life. The first attempt, my voice broke halfway through. My reflection blurred in tears, my chest heaved, and I turned away. The second attempt, I steadied myself with a deep breath. I reached the part where I described the forgery, and my knees buckled. I slid down against the sink, sobbing into my hands. On the third attempt, I stood straighter. I kept my eyes locked on the woman in the mirror, the woman I had avoided for so long. My voice trembled but did not break. By the time I reached the words, "That is not my signature," my tone rang with something I had not heard in years still. I was not alone. Mrs. Dad's. Tanaka arrived at my door with a stack of fresh printer paper. "Use mine," she said firmly. "Ink is cheap. Dignity is not." A retired librarian from down the street offered his old typewriter so my statements could be stamped in ink rather than printed. Juries like permanence, he said with a wink. Even the postman, who had noticed the heavy envelopes of documents going in and out, paused one afternoon to murmur, "Fight hard, Mrs. Thale." Parker. For the first time in decades, I felt a community forming around me, not children bound by blood, but allies bound by respect. Still, fear coiled in my gut each night. I would lie awake, imagining Mark on the witness stand, Laura with her arms crossed, their voices twisting the narrative into knots. Daniel coached me through it. Stay precise. Don't wander. When they ask you if you willingly transferred money, you answer with dates. When they suggest you signed papers, you say, "That is not my signature." And you hold your ground. We rehearsed in his cramped office, the smell of coffee and old carpet lingering in the air. He played the role of opposing counsel, interrupting me mid-sentence, throwing barbed questions meant to trip me. Each time, my heart hammered. At first, I stammered. Then, I faltered. Then, I stood taller. By the fifth round, my answers were clipped, measured. I looked him in the eye without flinching. "You're getting there," he said, scribbling notes. I wiped sweat from my brow. Getting there isn't enough. His smile was brief, but real. It will be. The night before our first court date, I sat alone at my dining table, surrounded by towers of paper. Bank statements, receipts, photographs, affidavits. My hands slid across them, smoothing edges, organizing stacks into neat piles. Each document carried weight. A transfer, a broken promise, a false signature. Alone, they were fragile. Together, they were impenetrable. I pressed my palm against the binder marked "Shruth." My reflection shimmered faintly in its plastic cover. I whispered to the empty room. Every paper I gathered was a brick in the wall of my defense. And for the first time, I believed that wall could hold. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and dust, an odd mixture of cleanliness and decay. My shoes clicked against the marble floor as Daniel guided me toward the courtroom. Each step echoed louder than the last, as though the building itself was listening. When the heavy doors opened, a chill rushed out. The room was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in mood. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted. The judge's bench loomed above, dark and immovable. I lowered myself into the chair at our table, my fingers clutching the binder labeled "Truth." The grain of the cover pressed against my skin. Daniel leaned close. "Steady breaths," he murmured. I nodded, but my chest rose and fell too quickly. Across the room, Mark and Laura sat with their lawyer, faces set in stone. They looked through me, not at me, as if I were already erased. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The scrape of benches, the shuffle of feet. I stood. My knees trembled, but I held my head high. The trial began. Their lawyer moved first, his voice oily and confident. He painted me as confused, overwhelmed, too old to manage my own affairs. He spoke of misunderstandings and family obligations, of children burdened with protecting a mother from herself. I listened in silence, each word slashing at my patience. My fists tightened in my lap until the knuckles burned white. When Laura took the stand, she adjusted her blazer, speaking in the polished tone she reserved for clients. My mother agreed to let us handle her finances. She said she trusted us. We only ever acted in her best interest. Best interest. The words tasted like ash. Mark followed. Less polished, but just as poisonous. Mom always sent money willingly. She said it was easier that way. We never forced her. She wanted us to succeed. I wanted to leap from my chair and shout liars, but Daniel touched my arm lightly, a signal. Wait. Then came the forged documents. Their lawyer presented them, as if unveiling truth, sliding them across the evidence table. My name, flowing in perfect loops, stared back at me. The judge glanced down, expression unreadable. My heart thundered. But Daniel stood calmly. We'll address authenticity later, Your Honor. When our turn came, Daniel's voice sharpened to a blade. Mrs. Parker, he said when I took the stand, tell the court what you discovered in your son's papers. I swallowed, my throat dry. My voice wavered at first. I found drafts, multiple versions of a transfer document. My signature copied, practiced, rehearsed. He held up the photographs I had taken, enlarged, projected for the court, the smudged attempts, the half-finished loops of my name. Gasps fluttered across the benches. Daniel turned to Mark, his tone crisp. Can you explain why your mother's signature appears in half a dozen drafts inside your folder? Mark's jaw worked. His lawyer objected. Planya. The judge overruled. I don't know, Mark muttered. His eyes flickered toward Laura. Daniel pressed. So someone just happened to practice your mother's name repeatedly inside your folder without your knowledge. Silence. Mark's face burned crimson. Next came the witnesses. The locksmith, a wiry man with oil-stained hands, testified. Yes, Mrs. Parker asked me to change her locks. She said she didn't feel safe. This was days before her children showed up with legal papers. The pharmacist stepped up, holding my prescription records. Mrs. Parker was prescribed medication for acute stress, starting immediately after threats to her autonomy. That's consistent with emotional duress. Each statement built the wall higher. I could almost feel the cage around me loosening with every brick. Finally, it was my turn again. Daniel's eyes urged me forward. You've heard your children's testimony. What do you want to say, Mrs. Beria? Parker? I rose from the witness chair slowly, my palms slick. I turned to face the judge, the jury, the cold expanse of the courtroom. My voice quivered at first, then grew steadier with every word. I am not here to beg for place in my children's lives. I am here to guard my own. I was never irrelevant. I was always the author of my name. The words rang louder than I expected, bouncing off wood and stone. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Even Laura's eyes flickered, unsettled. I sat down, breathless, but unbroken. Closing arguments came swift and sharp. Their lawyer insisted it was all confusion, that no fraud was proven. Daniel countered with precision, laying out the documents, the witnesses, the timeline. He ended simply, Mrs. Parker is not confused. She is not irrelevant. She is resisting theft by those who should have protected her most. The judge's gavel struck once, commanding silence. He read the verdict slowly, each word deliberate. This court finds the claims of transfer unsubstantiated. The documents in question are deemed fraudulent. The requests made by the petitioners are denied. Full authority remains with Mrs. Bisses, Eleanor Parker. My chest collapsed with relief. I gripped the edge of the table, tears blurring my vision. Daniel's hand rested briefly on mine, grounding me. Across the room, Laura's face drained of color. Mark slumped in his chair, staring at the floor. The bailiff called the session adjourned. The judge's gavel came down again, sharp, final. And in that instant, I felt something inside me shatter free. The gavel did not just strike wood. It struck open the cage. When I finally stepped back into my house, the silence was unbearable. No voices, no footsteps, no echoes of slammed doors. Just silence, thick and unyielding. I set my handbag down on the table. The sound of it thudding against the wood startled me, as though even the house had forgotten what life sounded like. The Edo box sat exactly where I'd left it on the shelf. Its carved cranes seemed to gleam faintly in the evening light. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the smooth wood. For years, I had believed it was a charm. Tonight, it felt heavier, like an anchor tethering me to everything I had endured. I carried it to the chair and sat with it in my lap, holding it the way one might cradle a fragile bird. My thumb traced the slip of paper taped to its lid. Mine. The ink had smudged slightly from where my hand had pressed it so many times. The trial was over. The judge's gavel had fallen in my favor. The fraudulent papers were condemned, my autonomy affirmed. I had won. And yet, victory rang hollow. That night, I did not sleep. The house seemed too awake, too restless. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the whisper of my own breath. The words from the past months circled like vultures in my head. Mom, don't interfere. It's routine. Just sign here. Irrelevant. Each phrase cut deeper in memory than it had in the moment. Spoken once, they were daggers. Replayed endlessly, they became chains. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the voices lived inside me now. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I padded barefoot into the living room and sat again with the Edo box. The night pressed against the windows, black and infinite. I whispered into the stillness. I won, but am I truly free? The question sat heavy in the air, heavier than the box itself. Yes, the law was on my side. Yes, my house remained mine. My name had been cleared, my signature protected. But what about the hollow that remained where family used to live? What about the fracture that no verdict could mend? I thought of Laura's face when the judge delivered the verdict. Her jaw tight, her eyes darting, fury barely restrained. I thought of Mark's hunched shoulders, the way he couldn't meet my gaze. No apology, no remorse, only resentment. Children I had carried, children I had sacrificed for, now strangers I had defeated in court. Was this freedom? Or another kind of exile? At dawn, I rose from the chair and opened the curtains. Pale light seeped in, painting the room in soft gray. Dust motes drifted through the beam like suspended memories. The house looked the same as it always had, same walls, same furniture. But something fundamental had shifted. The walls no longer pressed in. The air no longer felt owned by anyone but me. Still, the emptiness was stark. I brewed tea, the kettle whistling sharp in the quiet. The sound filled the house for a moment, then died away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I cupped the warm mug between my hands, inhaling steam that smelled faintly of jasmine. The first sip burned my tongue, but I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was still here. By afternoon, exhaustion finally claimed me. I curled under a blanket on the sofa. The Edo box balanced carefully on my chest. My breathing slowed, though my mind still spun. Dreams came fractured, filled with voices. Laura's voice chanting, "Irrelevant." Mark's muttering routine. The lawyer's pen clicking against the table. The judge's gavel striking wood. I woke with a jolt, sweat beading my forehead. The blanket slipped to the floor. For a long moment, I sat there trembling, staring at the Edo box. And then, slowly, I realized. The voices were fading. Each day, perhaps, they would lose their echo. Perhaps, one day, silence would mean peace rather than emptiness. That evening, I opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote in large, deliberate letters. Next, the ink bled slightly, but I didn't care. The word looked solid, alive. I closed the book and rested my hand on the Edo box one final time. Victory tasted of ash, I whispered, until I chose what came next. And with that, I felt the first stirrings of true freedom. The house that had once felt like a cage no longer bound me, but it still held ghosts. Every corner whispered with echoes. Arguments, slammed doors, the scratch of pens across fraudulent papers. I could not keep living among those shadows. So, with the court's ruling secured, I sold it. The ink dried on the contract, and I walked away without looking back. My palms tingled as I held the check, not with fear this time, but with possibility. I found a plot of land on the edge of the countryside, a place where the air was softer, freer. The ground sloped gently toward a stream, and when the wind moved through the trees, it sounded like distant applause. I decided to build something no one could take from me, my own miniature Edo village. It began with the Red Bridge. I hired a carpenter to construct it from cedar, painting it a bold vermilion that shone against the green fields. When the paint dried, I stood on it alone, gazing down at the stream running beneath. My reflection wavered in the water-aged, lined but steady. Next came the lanterns. Wooden posts with paper shades, strung along the path like gentle stars waiting for dusk. At night, when I lit them, the village glowed as though cradling its own constellation. The Torii gate rose last, taller than me, standing proudly at the entrance. I ran my hands along its beams, smooth and solid, a threshold into the world I was shaping. Piece by piece, the dream took form. Small wooden houses, a koi pond, winding gravel paths. My fingers bled from sanding wood. My back ached from bending over stones, but I welcomed the pain. It was mine. The Edo box that had once been a charm now sat in the heart of the village, inside a tiny shrine I built just for it. On its lid, the faded slip of paper still read, "Mine." This time, it did not feel like defiance. It felt like truth. People noticed. Curious passers-by stopped at the gate, marveling at the lanterns, the painted bridge, the delicate houses. Children begged to step inside, their laughter tumbling through the air like bells. I let them run the paths, let them chase each other over the bridge, their joy staining the village brighter than any paint. One little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "It feels like magic here." I smiled, offering him a paper fan I had painted with cranes. His eyes widened, and he bowed clumsily, the way he had seen in cartoons. I bowed back, and his laughter spilled across the lanterns. Tourists began arriving too, travelers who heard of the strange Edo village rising in a quiet countryside. They snapped photos, touched the Torii gate with reverence, whispered about how one woman had built it from nothing. But for me, it wasn't nothing. It was built from everything. Every sacrifice, every betrayal, every scrap of strength I had clawed back. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the gravel path, I heard a small voice behind me. "Grandma?" I turned, broom in hand. There, just inside the gate, stood my granddaughter, Laura's child. She was smaller than I remembered, her hair falling in loose curls around her face. She must have slipped away. There was no sign of Laura, no car nearby. My breath caught. I hadn't expected to see her here. She walked forward slowly, eyes wide, taking in the bridge, the lanterns, the koi pond shimmering in the sunlight. Finally, she whispered, almost reverently, "Grandma, it's like walking inside your heart." The broom fell from my hand. My throat closed as tears surged hot and sudden. I bent down, gathering her into my arms, inhaling the scent of her hair soap and sunshine. For the first time in years, I felt something heal. Not the whole wound, but a stitch, fragile and necessary. Now, mornings unfold differently. I rise with the sun, slide open the wooden shutters of my small cottage, and step into the village. Once, I used to dread the sound of my phone ringing, its weight in my hand like a stone pulling me under. Now, I hold something else. A ceramic cup of matcha, steam curling upward in soft tendrils. My fingers wrap around it lightly, almost playfully. The phone was once a burden, heavy as 1,000 pounds. The teacup is light as air. I sit by the koi pond, watching orange and white bodies ripple beneath the surface. The red bridge arches above them. The lanterns sway gently in the breeze. The torii stands tall like a sentinel of freedom. I breathe. I drink. I exist. Visitors often ask why I built it. I smile and say, because I could. But the truth is simpler, sharper. I built it to remind myself that creation can rise from ruin, that beauty can grow where betrayal once took root. The village does not erase the pain. My children's absence still aches, like phantom limbs. But here, among the wood and lanterns, the ache no longer owns me. It simply passes through, like wind through the trees. And when children run across the bridge, when strangers marvel at the gate, when my granddaughter whispers into the stillness of my heart, I know the life I shaped is mine alone. If, quote, tupping, I was never their dying burden. I was the architect of my second life. I want to end this story by turning to you. Yes, you, the one who has stayed with me through every page, every silence, every betrayal, and every breath of liberation. Thank you for walking this road with me. I am Eleanor Parker, once called irrelevant, now the keeper of my own key. I know my story is not only mine. Somewhere out there, another mother is holding her breath in a house that no longer feels like hers. Somewhere, another grandmother is counting coins while her children dismiss her as a burden. Somewhere, another parent is staring at a phone, replaying a word that cut too deep to forget. Maybe that someone is you. If one day your own child told you you're relevant, would you fade into silence or build your own village? I ask you this not to wound, but to awaken. Because silence is a slow death, and surrender is another kind of exile. But creation, no matter how small, no matter how trembling at first, is a path back to freedom. My Edo village was not just wood and paint and lanterns. It was proof that I could still shape, still breathe, still rise. That I could carve beauty out of betrayal. That I could write mine in places no one else could erase. And so, I turn to you. What will you build? Maybe not a bridge or a Torii gate, but a line in the sand, a notebook filled with your own truth, a cup of tea lifted in peace that belongs only to you. If my story touched you, I ask you for something simple. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs courage. Follow so you can walk beside me in the weeks ahead. Not for me, for the countless parents and grandparents still trapped in silence, still waiting for proof that freedom can bloom even after the harshest winter. Your voice might be the echo someone else needs. Your presence might be the lantern in another person's darkness. I was told I was irrelevant. But every time someone listens, every time someone says, "Me too," that word loses its grip. And I promise you this. As long as I breathe, I will keep telling these stories. Stories of loss, of betrayal, but also of resistance, of creation, of freedom. Because I am not their irrelevance. I am my freedom.